The Packers, at least leading up to Week 8, were an objectively bad football team. There are a torrent of analytics that would back that up, and plenty of real-world film examples that can help explain those analytics, and believe me, we will look at those today. But first things first, I flew all the way out here to Buffalo, New York in the fall, where it's gorgeous right now, by the way. I flew all the way out here to see this shit show of a Packers offense live and in person with my own eyes, because if there's one thing I've learned through all of my travels this season, it's that things really get put into perspective for how good or bad a team actually is when you can sit there in the crowd and watch them run into a buzzsaw. So, let's go do that. So that game was both very predictable, but also somewhat unexpected. Also, hi, hello, this is my hotel room. It's a few days after the game. I've had time to study the tape and digest things, and hopefully come up with a summary of what we all just saw, which is that in the first 7 weeks of the season, the Packers had a very distinct problem on offense, which is that they could not sustain long drives. They fixed that against Buffalo by running the absolute shit out of the ball. However, by running the absolute shit out of the ball, they then realized that they have even more problems than that might not be so easy to fix. Fair warning, there's a lot of math in this episode and a lot of really scary numbers, so just bear with me, but I promise, by the end, it's all going to make sense. The Packers offense this year is one of the most frustrating enigmas I have ever seen, because on one hand, their overall play success rate is 6th in the league at 37.7%, which is great, but their effectiveness on third down specifically is horrendous. And by the way, success rate is defined as an offense gaining the necessary yardage it needs to get a certain distance closer to a first down or a score, obviously. So for instance, getting 40% of yards to go on first down counts as a success, getting 60% of yards to go on a second down is a success, and on third down, gaining enough yards to either move the chains or score is considered a success. Again, the Packers are 6th in the league in overall play success rate. Remember that. Their first down rate is 13th at 34.2%. Their second down rate is even better at 42.9%, which is 4th in the league, so they're really, really good on second down. But what completely cancels out their early down dominance is that things totally fall apart for them on third downs where they're forced into more obvious passing situations. And on those third downs specifically, their success rate is 21st at 38.4%. But trust me, it gets even worse. Looking at their offense, particularly when it's around midfield, meaning between the 40-yard lines, and by the way, that's an area of the field where they tend to throw at an absurdly high rate compared to running the ball, their third down success rate there is abysmally low at only 28.6%, which is the 4th worst mark in the league. If you compare that number this year to 2020 and 2021, Green Bay were 11th in the league in those situations at 47.2% success rate in those seasons, so we're looking at a drop of nearly 20% in key third down conversions in just 1 year. They stall out constantly in between the 40s now without getting into field goal range, and so as a result, only 26.9% out of all of their possessions result in a score, and that translates to them being 26th in the league in points per game at just over 18. Not to twist the knife too much while I'm stabbing, but that's even less than the Bears. So, all of those numbers then naturally lead to this question. Why the hell do they keep stalling out at midfield, even with an offense that is 8th in explosive plays and 6th in overall success rate? Why do they struggle to still get past the 50? Well, there's a few different reasons. For starters, as I alluded to earlier, for most of this year, they have just outright refused to run the ball to keep the chains moving. They would not hand off, even in short yardage, and even though arguably their best offensive player outside of Aaron Rodgers himself is Aaron Jones. On third downs of 3 yards to go or less around midfield, they only had 1 run to 5 passes in those situations, and as you might expect, they only went 2 of 6 on those third downs. Plus, on top of that, on third downs of 4 or more to go, they had 2 totally other main issues that would cause them to stall out. Number 1, they don't have a go-to receiver that Rodgers can trust to just go win against man coverage. And number 2, the Packers' answers for certain third down fronts on defense were way too predictable, and those defenses were able to scheme for them very easily to get Green Bay off the field. Let's start with the receiver issue first, because that's the obvious one that everybody's been talking about for months at this point. And once again, if you go back to 2020 and 2021, when the Packers were 11th in third down success rate at about a 47% clip, a big reason for that success was because when in doubt, Rodgers could just link up with Davante Adams and trust him to go beat Jalen Ramsey on a slant. Or they would put him in the slot and run a fade and trust him to just go win and get them out of a jam. They cannot do that this year. They can't just throw up a fade and expect it to be complete all the time to Romeo Doubs or Sammy Watkins or Samori Toure. They just don't have that kind of security blanket anymore. So if they want to beat man coverage looks, they have to do stuff like calling drive concepts or rub routes and stuff that just naturally breaks man coverage, which unfortunately for them is very limiting because if the defense adjusts to that and calls banjo or funnel coverages in man situations, meaning that the DBs can just play to their leverage and pass receivers off to make their coverage assignments easier, or if they just say screw it and outright call zone coverage, those little shallow routes and rub routes are just not going to be open anymore, and then you have no answers left at all. So that's a big problem for them that they can't just line up and go beat man. And of course, their injuries at receiver have only exacerbated that issue even further. Beyond all of that though, because I don't want the Davante thing to just be seen as an excuse or a crutch, the Packers offense in general is a little bit too predictable right now in terms of how the pass game reacts to certain looks on third down. If you look at the Jets game in particular, Robert Saleh and Jeff Ulbrich did a wonderful job at baiting Rodgers into working the flats in the quick passing game, only to then switch up the look post-snap and take his answers away. And here's what I mean by that. Oftentimes in third and medium situations, like say 3rd and 4-ish, when linebackers are walked up as if they're going to be the ones blitzing, and there's even numbers of DBs and receivers outside, Rodgers really loves to get his running backs out in the flat with blockers out in front, or in 3-by-1 situations, instead of the running back, he'll put the inside slot receiver out in the flat, and he'll run these little screens to the edge, because at that point, with that kind of look, you've got a hat on a hat out in front, and you can usually just trust your receiver or running back to make a play in space. However, the Jets staff, who are obviously very familiar with the Packers staff, they knew that Green Bay really likes to do this kind of stuff. So in order to take advantage of that tendency and play into it, they would just walk their linebackers up, full well knowing that Rodgers was going to be looking for a quick throw to the flat, and from there they would just bait that throw and rally and tackle it short of the sticks. They would simplify the read on purpose, both for the offense and for the defense, and it worked because they trusted that Rodgers would just keep trying to work those flats over and over again, and they trusted their own guys to make those tackles in space. Rodgers took the bait almost every single time, and the Jets played it so well that they held the Packers to 4 of 16 on third down, and specifically on those third downs at midfield where they struggle the most, Green Bay went 1 of 7. It was undeniably awful. Just to put a bow on this point about predictability though, I want to highlight this play as well because it really demonstrates just how dialed in the Jets defense was with the Packers' offensive tendencies. This is early in the third quarter, just short of midfield again, and just looking at the picture right here, we can take a pretty good guess at what Rodgers was thinking. This looks like it could be cover 5 pre-snap, also known as cover 2 man, and it looks like this linebacker, CJ Mosley, is solely walked up just to occupy this guard in pass protection and make it so that he can't immediately slide to handle the loaded side of the front. Rodgers does not believe that Mosley is actually going to be blitzing at all, but what he does believe is that Mosley is in man coverage, and he thinks that because of this supposed man coverage look, he's going to have one of two options available to him. Number one, it's possible that A.J. Dillon will once again be able to get out to the flat quickly as what's known as a fast three, and in that case, Rodgers can just get the ball out quick to him, and he can try to beat Mosley's angle to pick up a first down. That's the part of the equation that we've already seen. But secondly, if Rodgers doesn't like the read to the flat, this fake stock block into a slant from Romeo Doubs should also be wide open against man coverage too, and he can hit that over the middle instead. So think of this play call as a progression off of that screen call to the flat, because it has the receiver faking a block as if it's a screen, and then he'll break inside. Now, having said all of that, what I want you to understand here is that this is not actually man coverage, and Rodgers completely misread this pre-snap look. The Jets are highly aware that Rodgers responds to man coverage looks with fades, slants, or flat routes most of the time, and so they actually called a variation of quarter-half zone defense here to directly combat that tendency. To the field side, they're in a version of quarters known as stubby in the Nick Saban world or special in the Gary Patterson world, and then to the boundary side, they're in a normal cover 2 look. Focusing on the field side specifically, the rules for stubby are relatively simple here, and once you memorize them, you'll be able to point them out basically in real time whenever you watch games on broadcast. Sauce Gardner as the outside corner has all of number 1 vertical. Again, remember, receivers are counted from the outside in, 1, 2, and 3. So Sauce has number 1 vertical, and Saban calls that Meg or man everywhere he goes. And yes, before you ask in the comments, I know that he's taking a zone turn technique here, and that's because he's super aggressive and greedy, and he's dying to get a pick by just staring down Rodgers. But trust me, this is man coverage, even though he's using a zone coverage technique. He does have number 1 vertical. When it comes to number 2 and number 3 though, which are Doubs and Dillon respectively, think of stubby rules as basically the same thing as palms coverage, except to the inside and not to the outside. It's literally just a triangle, a 3/2 coverage, so this slot corner will take all of number 2 vertical unless number 3 is out to the flat immediately, in which case he'll pass off number 2 and come down to number 3. And the linebacker, Mosley, if number 3 is out to the flat, then he transitions to walling number 2 inside, and if number 2 then goes vertical, he's going to have help from the safety over the top, so they basically have a 2-on-1 there on that vertical threat. In a nutshell, that is stubby. It's one of the foundational coverage calls within modern quarters coverage schemes, and the Jets called it specifically to stop this very common third down call from Green Bay. Because if you watch closely, now after the ball is snapped, you can see the nickel come off the slot, and he's now got good leverage on Dillon in the flat, while Mosley is sitting inside on the slant. Rodgers cannot hit either of those 2 reads now. You combine that hesitation with Sauce doing Sauce things out on the boundary and taking away the 9 route, and a very well executed stunt up front, and Green Bay is pretty much hosed here. The Jets got a crucial third down sack, and once again, the Packers are off the field before they could even cross the 50. So, as a general overview, all of those individual issues were why the Packers stalled at a ridiculous rate in the first 7 weeks of the season. Their receivers were just not good enough. They also didn't run the ball nearly enough to compensate for their receiving core not being good enough. And when they did throw the ball, they were way too predictable from a schematic perspective and were very easy to game plan against. It was just overall a pretty big mess. However, what about that Bills game? Why was it on Sunday night that game felt so different, even though, as a whole, they still didn't put up that many points? Well, it's because that game was different, but also equally bad, for equally different reasons. Again, please allow me to go down a little bit of a numbers rabbit hole here. I'm going to try to explain this as best I can. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to SeatGeek because I literally could not have made this trip happen, and therefore this video happen without them. SeatGeek is the ticketing partner of this channel, obviously. I use them to buy 4 tickets up in the upper deck for this game, and I also use them to get tickets for a whole bunch of other games so far this season, including 2 other Bills road games over in LA and in Miami. I've also been to Texas. I'm thinking I might be in Cincinnati in January, potentially Atlanta. And then I also got Vegas in January. I'm going to be in Phoenix for the Super Bowl. So I've been using SeatGeek the entire year, and I'm still not done yet. I'll keep you posted on which games I'm actually going to. By the way, I'm trying to finalize my schedule as I go so that I can get to a whole bunch of games that, have playoff implications and stuff like that. But more on that later. For now, if you guys want to use SeatGeek, I personally love the app. It's really, really affordable tickets. Like, they have great deals. The app itself, the user interface is great. I have never, ever had any problems using the app, ever. And I wouldn't recommend it to you if I did. So if you guys want to check it out for yourself, you can use my promo code at the link in the description below. That'll give you a $20 off discount for whatever tickets you want for either football or live concerts or hockey or NBA, really whatever you need. Again, that is promo code Brett down at the link in the description below. That'll get you a $20 discount. So check it out, see if you like it. It's a really good app, and thank you to SeatGeek for both sponsoring this episode and for making all of my travels this season possible. I could not have done this without you guys. But with that being said, we have a shit show to talk about. So why don't we get back to what we all just unfortunately witnessed on Sunday night. Against the Bills, Green Bay finally leaned into what they should be good at on paper, running the ball, and they didn't allow themselves to get baited into throwing it on 3rd and short situations like what happened in the Jets game. If they were in a 3rd and 2 or a 3rd and 3, they just kept running the ball, and it kept working. Their 3rd down success rate overall was 10th in the league across week 8 at 50%, and their success rate in the middle area of the field, where they usually stall out, was 75%. So they were finally able to keep some drives going and march down the field past the 50-yard line. It was, objectively speaking, a pretty decent offensive performance for them, and I think Packers fans were right to be happy about it. But, unfortunately for Green Bay, if you really paid attention to the flow of that game as they kept going down the field and extending these drives further and further, a whole new problem got revealed, and it's that they don't have a good enough defense for this new style of offense to win them very many games. And I know that sounds weird, but just go with me on this. The Packers' scoring drives against Buffalo were 8 plays long, another 8-play drive on top of that, and yet another 12-play drive. They averaged 5 minutes and 37 seconds on each of those scoring drives because of how run-heavy they were forced to be. And they also had 2 additional drives that once again stalled out that lasted 5 minutes and 15 seconds and 6 minutes and 47 seconds respectively. And again, those 2 other drives resulted in 0 points because of turnovers on downs. So that is 28 minutes and 53 seconds of time of possession for only 5 drives and 17 points. They had 9 possessions the entire game, which is low, but in itself, it's not that big of a deal because most top offenses average somewhere around 10 to 10.5 possessions per game. But if you take into account that even an elite unit like Buffalo, they only score touchdowns on about 31.5% of their possessions, it's hard for me to expect Green Bay to put up more than 20 points if they have to burn basically half a quarter just to get a touchdown. With this style of offense and only getting 9 possessions, they're going to run out of time long before they can get to that magical 28-point number that they need to win most of their games. And that's exactly what happened against Buffalo. By the start of the second half, they were down by 3 possessions, and because of how long their drives were taking just to move the ball down the field, mathematically speaking, they had very little hope of coming back in that game. They just simply didn't have the time to make their ideal offense work. And that's an even bigger problem with this team, in my opinion, because if a byproduct of that clock-killing offense is that they cap themselves at 20 to 24 points per game, it puts tremendous pressure on their defense to keep opposing teams under 20 points as well. And quite frankly, Green Bay has just not been good enough on defense to do that. And I mean that literally. They are 16th in the NFL in scoring defense, and they allow 21.6 per game. They're not terrible by any means, but this defense has just not been dominant enough to win a game all by themselves when each team might only get 9 or 10 possessions max. So all told, as of right now, the Packers have a ball control offense, which is nice, but they don't have a ball control defense. And believe me, that is not a place you want to be as a football team. They can beat the other bad teams on their schedule by playing this style. The Lions, the Bears, the Rams. The Lions again, But whenever Green Bay faces a good, well-rounded team like Buffalo, or Miami, or Philly, or Dallas, or Minnesota, who are all coming up on the schedule, they're going to get results like last week, because they're just not built to keep up with teams blow for blow that can score in less than 6 minutes. And just as one final aside, believe me, Packers fans, I really understand your pain. And I know that it was probably fun for you to watch your team be able to cross midfield for once on Sunday. That must have been really exhilarating for you. But I'm not so sure that it's the saving grace you think it is, because this offense has only been half the problem. This newfound run game is not going to fix everything unless the defense fixes itself too. Without that side of the ball also getting exponentially better, unfortunately, you're probably still going to lose. Just slower now, and more painfully. All right, that'll do it for this week. Just to kind of summarize for the few of you that maybe have been drifting in and out here, do I think the Packers are broken right now, offensively and defensively? Yes. However, do I think that they also have a half-decent chance of fixing their problems and going on a run in the back half of the year and making us all look very, very stupid? Also, yes. It's a long season, obviously, and if there's anything that we learned from last week's episode on Kyle Pitts, it's that things can go from desperate and horrible to pretty fucking great really quickly in this league, and you never really know when that's going to happen. Also, one more thing, just as a reminder, I do have a live stream during a Packers game coming up in a couple weeks. That's going to be during the Thursday night game, just like we do every Thursday night over on our podcast channel, the Bootleg Football Podcast. We have episodes that come out every week, and we do Thursday night live streams every week. We break out the whiteboard, we break down plays, we have, some fun stats that I don't think you get anywhere else. So we do our best to make it a broadcast experience that you can't get from a normal TV network and that you can't get from Amazon. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. Stop by both this Thursday and next Thursday or any other Thursday. We do it every single TNF game, and, give us a shot. I think you'll enjoy the show. So I'll see you guys back here next week. I'll see you guys over on the podcast channel next week as well. And until then, later.